Box, and I'm not sure after class, have been translated into 30 different languages. They're about, and she's working on her next book is going to be published in October, and then she's working on another book. She did not write her first book till she was 50, and it was published when you were 51, approximately. So she has quite, if you want to go on her website, she has quite an accomplished career for this. And from what I hear, she gets bored, so she moves around, changes jobs. And her parents are also joining us, Georgie and her father. Well, a little Bob is going on in that family. Anyway, without further ado, it's Christina.
Thank you. This is great. How's the sound, everyone? Sound?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I really appreciate everybody coming, and I'll give you a chance later, but just to remind you, let's make sure everybody puts a name in the little jar over there on a piece of paper, because I'll be giving away a couple of signed copies after we're done to random winners. So, right. Thanks again for coming out today, and a very special thanks to Cindy and to Shelley for setting this all up. As you know, Shelley does a wonderful job with AV, and she put together an absolutely mind-blowing video, which I think rivals most of what my, Big Five publisher people have done. So I think you need to go up to New York and talk to some people and start freelancing.
No.
I said freelancing at a distance. Now, I know some of you have already read Masterclass, this book, and some of you have not, maybe. So could I have a show of hands, who has read it? Okay, super. And who has not? Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. I just want to know, because that helps me when I'm either talking or answering questions, not to give anything away, right? And no spoilers. All right, and by the way, is there anybody here who decided to not read it and use it when the Charmin toilet paper aisles were empty last week? No. Okay, that's good. I would actually never recommend reading, using a book as toilet paper. Even, it's way too rough on those little tender areas. So,
Also, the paper isn't designed to dissolve.
it is not designed to dissolve, and you have to throw it in the waste bin. It would be good. Now to the serious part. So, imagine a near future in the United States, maybe even right now. Imagine that in this future, every individual carries a number, a Q score, Q as in the letter Q. This is assigned pre-birth based on a battery of tests and updated regularly by means of standardized testing. There's this lady over here who hasn't read the book, and she's looking at me like I am a monster to have read this, and it's great. I love it. Thank you. So, assigned pre-birth, regularly updated. This is all for the greater good, right? This is all for the improvement of society. You keep your scores high, you'll attend a premier school, you'll have a bright future. If your scores plummet, you're off to a federal institution. Maybe you'll push a broom for the rest of your life. Maybe you'll dig ditches. Now, imagine a mother who teaches at one of these top schools. Imagine she has two daughters, one perfect, one not so perfect. Sort of like me and my sister. Imagine she loses one of those daughters to a system where only perfection counts. That's the book. That's Masterclass. And yes, it's dark. It's, I know I don't look like the kind of person who has a dark side, but that woman in the flowery shirt in the audience let me watch all the vampire movies I wanted to when I was 5 years old. And then she let me read Stephen King. And I still turn on all the lights when I wake up at night and go down to the kitchen for something to drink. So thanks, Mom. Nobody called child services on that one. Actually, it's great. I love having a dark side, even though having a dark side is at times disturbing, and at times I scare myself. So I mentioned Q numbers when I was telling you about Masterclass, and I wanted to give you a little anecdote. One of the things that, one of the interesting things about being a published author, particularly with a larger publishing house, is that you learn approximately 5 million things about the book industry that no one else knows, and that you didn't know before. So take, for instance, title changes. Did anybody here know that, well, I wouldn't even give it away. Did anybody know what Stephanie Meyer's originally submitted Twilight as, the title? No. Forks. Forks. I think that was, I think that title change was right on the money. Yeah. I'm just trying to imagine it. I get Forks, vampire movie, you could actually do something graphic with that. Forks, vampire, blood, stuff like that, but it didn't work. I also have a good friend who wrote a historical novel about circus freaks, and it was called The Transformation of Bartholomew Fortuna, but she originally submitted it as Hunger, which actually, having read the book, it's really a perfectly apt title. And Masterclass didn't start out as Masterclass. It started out as Q. That's it. Just the letter Q. And in fact, it is published as Q in the UK. So, which makes me really happy because it's just this book with just this great big Q on it. And of course, when you read the book, it does make sense. There are some people in certain publishing houses, unfortunately, who are not able to understand why I would title my book Q. But I think, let me read, I don't usually like to read at people, but because we're talking about title changes and Q, and I mentioned these Q scores, I just thought I'd give you a little taste of a couple of paragraphs here from the very beginning. Things haven't been good here for a long time. I almost can't remember how it felt before we all started carrying the Q numbers around with us, like an extra and unnatural print on the tips of our fingers. A badge of honor for some, a mark of shame for others. I suppose, after more than a decade, you can get used to anything. Like cell phones. Remember not having the entire universe in your back pocket? Remember sitting on the floor, talking to your best friend about nothing, unwinding a curly cord, only to watch it kink up again? Remember all that? I do and I don't. Blockbuster 2-day video rentals and bookstores the size of an airplane hangar, they're distant memories, faded impressions of life before streaming and same-day delivery. It's the same way with the Q numbers. Although we've carried numeric strings with us in one form or another for most of our lives. Our social security numbers for tax returns, our home telephone numbers in case an emergency call to mom becomes necessary, our grade point averages that would fill boxes and dozens of college application forms. Men in a clothing store became 34 long or 16 and a half, 33. Women became dress sizes 8, 6, 14. In the more upscale shops, we were our measurements. In doctor's offices, we were our height and weight, watching one number creep down while the other number crept up. We've always been our numbers. DOB, GPA, SSN, BP, systolic and diastolic, BMI, SAT and GRE and GMAT and LSAT. 35, 22, 35. Marilyn, damn her. 3, the babe. Pins and CSCs and expiration dates. Jenny's phone number from that old song. And for the extreme among us, the entire 16-digit sequence on our Visa cards. Our ages, our net worths, our IQs. Thank you for laughing at my jokes. It's hard sometimes being a 50-something-year-old writer and trying to relate to people who are 22 years old, because if this audience were of a slightly different demographic, I can promise you people would have been looking at me saying, huh? So I'd like to ask a couple of more questions now, just to keep things interactive. And this is sort of an audience poll to put this book of mine in some kind of context. First, how many people here had heard about the American eugenics movement before reading Masterclass? More than I thought. Okay. How many folks knew at least a few details about this movement? Okay. All right, well, I mean, you're librarians, you know, you just and then third, how many of you were taught anything about the U.S. eugenics movement in, let's say, kindergarten through 12 history course in school? Right, that's also what I expected. How many of you were taught something about Hitler's final solution or the Holocaust in one of your K through 12 courses? Okay, not you, Mom? Well, you could raise your hand. This is what we do. And I'm telling you, some people's parents. So these are the numbers I expected. And if anyone asks me, why I wrote Masterclass, I think this little exercise says quite a bit about, how I would answer that question. And don't get me wrong, I'm not judging. I hadn't heard of it either, right? I didn't, nobody I've ever talked to had. Because like most American high school students, and maybe like some of you, I endured 4 years of U.S. history. I say endured because suffered through seems a little over the top, even though that's probably more the truth than anything. And I say learning because the curriculum seems set on teaching students like me to just memorize stuff, rather than showing us how to assemble pieces of information with some kind of goal to understanding cultural, economic, and political events in their contexts. So instead of that type of learning, I memorized, the dates of the Stamp Act, and who did that Boss Tweed cartoon that was published. Nash, I think it was. Thomas Nash or Thomas Nast? Nast? I got it close. I learned who the good guys were and who the bad guys were in wars, right? And that was it. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to write a piece of commercial fiction that uses a resurgence of a past historic event as its background. And I did the same thing kind of accidentally. When I wrote Vox, I had no idea where that book was going to lead. I wanted to write a horror story, really. And what could be more horrible than electrocuting people if they speak over 100 words a day? I mean, this is like scary. That's it. I didn't know what it was going to turn into, and I didn't realize that I was actually going to end up with a fictional recreation of the Victorian culture of domesticity. I also didn't expect that recreation of the culture of domesticity would ring so relevant, 100 and some odd years later. So I think a lot of works of fiction are accidents waiting to happen. And Fox was one of those accidents, and Masterclass was also one of those accidents. It's a book that I think of as deeply disturbing. The accident was great because it was a random search string that led to another search string, and then I found the basis for a story that needed to be told. Specifically, I picked up a copy of Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Michael D'Antonio's book called The State Boys Rebellion, which is a fabulous book, and I think it would make a great book club choice. Michael's also a really nice guy. He gave me a quote for Masterclass, which is really nice considering he's won a Pulitzer Prize and I haven't. I'm competing with Charmin. So he wrote this book, and what he did was he went and he tracked down a number of adult men who had been children who were institutionalized at the Fernald State School outside of Waltham, Massachusetts. And he did quite a bit of investigative journalism on their stories. And that was what prompted me to look at the state school system in the 20th century here in the US. So an entire rabbit hole opened up for me. And narrow, deep, twists along the way. And all this research led to horrors that I've never seen in history books, not the kind of history books I got as a kid. The obsession with breeding fitter humans, fitter family movements. It was called that, the fitter family movement. The better baby contests at state fairs. Really, you'd get a medal if you produced the best baby, and the best baby was, pretty and chubby and cute, not too chubby, of course, because you couldn't have that. White, probably, and certainly the parents' background and economic status and jobs probably had something to do with which baby was picked as well. Then there was this effective incarceration of children who were deemed unfit or feeble-minded. There was rampant IQ testing around the country. There was the forced sterilization of tens of thousands of men and women. Here in Virginia, we know the name Carrie Buck, and we probably are familiar with the 1927 Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell, which we'll get back to in a little bit. And all this was done in the name of science and in the name of a better society. So I might not have been shocked if I'd been reading about Germany under the Third Reich, but I wasn't. I was reading about the United States under the progressives, under the people like W.E.B. Du Bois and Margaret Sanger and John D. Rockefeller and a number of preeminent medical professionals, psychologists, scientists, university professors, and so forth. Right here. So I think sometimes when we discover a horror story that took place in our own backyard, it isn't enough to know about it. It kind of begs to be told and shouted out. And I think maybe even sent into classrooms and book clubs like this one. We got to dig this stuff up from the graveyards of history and give it some kind of new life. And believe me, writing some of this book was terrifying, and I'm talking about the parts that I didn't make up. So that's a bit of the background. As far as putting historical facts into fiction, that's always a tricky business, right? This is fiction. It's a novel. It says a novel on it. So I did make a lot of it up. But, and Elena's situation in particular, the main character situation, is entirely of my own making. Because thankfully we're mostly finished with this practice of controlling who breeds and who doesn't, although in the past year there have been some interesting news pieces about, I think, a detainment facility where this occurred to some women. But I had to write Masterclass because, as with all extremist movements, and I'm fascinated by extremism, I think there are always going to be some leftovers, and hanging on in our culture. And we often say history has a tendency to repeat itself. I think it has a very nasty tendency to repeat itself, a tenacious tendency to repeat itself, particularly when we're not paying attention. And I think also when we sort of relegate things to the past, things like the eugenics movement, out of embarrassment or whatever, to a closet, and then just decide, well, we're not going to open that closet because it's all done. So it's definitely a work of fiction, but there are historical events that are referenced that are very real. The Waltham School, for instance, the MIT and Quaker Oats, radioactive oatmeal experiments on the children who were at the Fernald School. This is true. They put a little bit of, radiated material into the Quaker oatmeal because Quaker Oats was working with MIT engineers to find out how well the nutrients in the oats were absorbed into the bodies. So they did this with those kids, yeah. And that's one of the things that Michael D'Antonio talks about in his book, The State Boys Rebellion. So highly recommended. I have gone on. I think I want to open up the floor. I was going to talk a little bit about writing in general, and if anybody has any questions about writing, I'm happy to answer them. I think my best advice, and there's lots of advice on the internet, how to write a novel, which is, hey, I used that. I did that Google. I didn't know how to write a novel. How do you start? You go to Google, you type in how to write a novel, and it tells you stuff. You think I'm kidding? Good. You've got, there's just so much advice out there, and so I don't know where that leaves us, but I think the best advice, I'm a relatively new novelist, the best advice I can give you is be fearless, right? That's it. You just have to be fearless. We all know that it takes, work and skill and some amount of talent, the ability to spell, knowing that, the Oxford comma really is a better choice, so that you don't end up dedicating your book to my parents, God, and Ayn Rand, right? That's why we need the Oxford comma. So, you want to run? Yeah, fine, just do it. You want to write? Okay, there's the old acronym, butt in the chair, honey. You can spell that out and figure out what it means all by yourselves. But there's, I think the fearlessness really, really works. And I owe it to an old professor of mine who is unfortunately not with us anymore. But he was the person who said, when I was studying syntax with him and going against the grain and not wanting to necessarily lean towards this theory just because it was popular, and he said, no, you just have to be fearless. And I think you are. If you are, you can sit back and good things will happen. So, thanks again for coming. We're going to open up the floor to questions, I think, right?
You have a question?
Are you pointing to me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and we have a microphone here.
I know
to
your
pass it.
mother and your father, and I know they're fearless, and I know you're fearless. How come you let them change the title of your book?
That's an excellent question. How come I let them change the title of my book from Q to Masterclass? Yeah, I had no choice.
Is that right?
They would print it if you didn't change it.
Well, I didn't, entirely, take on all of Penguin Random House by myself and test them on this, but they had no idea they thought it was a Star Trek character. They thought there was something else that's called Q, and I don't know what it is. Yeah, and most of them are too young to remember that, so it wasn't that. They just didn't get it. And how did I let it happen? obviously, editorial. There are a couple of different types of editing when you're talking about books. There's the the editing that the red that looks at Oxford commas or missing Oxford commas, for instance. And then there's developmental editing. Developmental editing happens first, and that's where we get into characters and story. And so there were a couple of things. For instance, originally there was no grandmother in Masterclass, and Grandma Fisher, or Oma Fisher, and there was instead a sister. The main character had a sister, and the sister was a bit too much like Jackie from Vox. The character is just too similar, and it made the plot line seem a bit too similar. So they suggested that, hey, change this. As far as forcing me to change things there's not a lot of force involved. I mean, there's usually a conversation about about these things, but so that happened, and sometimes I think in the process of making suggested changes, an idea will come to an author and they'll want to change something else. So I ended up I was going to move in a certain direction with Masterclass, and I ended up making it much darker. So.
My question is, do you just sit in the chair and start writing, or do you have an outline of what is going to happen?
I do have an outline. I actually find that there's a screenwriting. There are many different sort of templates and methods that people use. I mean, you have story engineering, the snowflake method, Blake Snyder's Save the Cat method, which is great. And actually I like Blake Snyder's Save the Cat method, but I particularly like this screenwriting technique called the beat sheet. And it's BEAT, as in, a beat. Like, so a story will have maybe, 10 or 12 major beats. And has anybody seen the movie Alien? A lot of people have seen Alien. Okay. Okay. Jaws. Yeah. Okay. So what do you have? You have the first beat. It's the normal world. Okay. Everybody's happy. Living on la Amity Island. Oh my God! Now something happened. There's an inciting incident. Oh wow! A shark. There's Chrissy. She goes swimming. The shark gets her. Dead Chrissy. Then we've got a moment of debate. That's the third beat. Oh, do we close the beaches? Do we not close the beaches? Oh no. And so on and so forth. And then you get towards the end, and this is for a thriller, obviously. For a romance, you might not have the bad guys close in, or you might. But yeah, the bad guys close in, right? The shark gets smarter. It gets closer to the boat. I mean, all is lost moment. There's Roy Scheider up there, with his shotgun, and the boat's sinking, right? I mean, we all know that. We all know that shot. I mean, that's dark moment of the soul. So that's the kind of outline that I write from. I know it's a long answer, but I think illustrating it with a movie, if you look up beat sheets and you look at an example of a beat sheet from The Hunger Games, for instance, because that follows it really nicely too, you will never be able to watch a movie again without going, Dalcher was right. That's the debate thing. Hey, wait a second. In most movies, the debate only lasts like a minute. They want to get right on to like dark moment of the soul and all is lost and let's kill the bad guys beats. But yes, so that's what I do. 12 sentences usually, or 12 beats, a little thing for each one. And then I know that I have to get to a certain point at a certain word count. I don't necessarily know how I'm going to get there until I start writing between those beats. So it's like half outline and half writing by the seat of my pants.
One thing I was very impressed with in the book is that you merge and seamlessly, shall I call it the history lesson part, with the plot of the book.
Oh,
And I
thank you.
didn't feel like we had a little stop and then we said, okay, now we're going to go on to the history lesson, or we'll get back to the story. How did you accomplish that?
would never be published if I did that. No, it's true. I mean, everybody here has read 1984. Okay, if you haven't, you're not. Mom? Dad? Well, I mean, just because I wouldn't invite you back if you had. 1984 is one of my favorite books. I read it every 4 years. And, I mean, I have read it every 4 years since I was about 14 years old. And because I think it needs reading. And there is a part in it where Winston Smith gets the book. You know, he gets the secret book, right, that the in-crowd all has access to. And he starts reading from it. And, you got, oh my God, you've got like 5 million pages of Winston Smith reading you about what Big Brother is trying to do, and what is the purpose of the war means peace, and knowledge is ignorance, and so on and so forth. And it is very dull. You cannot get away with that now. You just can't. So it's not that I'm so clever. It's that I don't even start that. I don't start down that route because I know it won't work. And there are some other examples of books that have done it. I mean, look at Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, and the John Galt speech, right? I love John Galt, he's great. I'd have married Francisco. But that speech, I find it redundant. Rand would insist that there's not one word in that book that doesn't need to be in the book. I think she's wrong, but readers today will not put up with that. And so, sorry, that's a long-winded answer. But I also like to give examples because, everybody here, if you're either your librarians, your readers, your researchers, and all of these questions that you ask, I think, I can tell you about what I did in my book, but who cares? I mean, I haven't sold that many books. But if I tell you what, Orwell did, and what we can't do now, then I think it kind of puts things in a nicer, bigger context. So who had your hand?
I thought the pacing of the book was one of the most successful elements in it. I got hooked at the beginning. I really was into the story, and I wanted to find out how it ended. And I had a tendency, which I had admitted at book club meetings, to end. But something about your writing, which I'm asking, this is my question, something about the way you put the book together kept me going. I actually just read until I was too tired to read anymore. But then I came back to it. So,
Thank you.
there's a hook at the beginning, you know what the story's about, but then I think technically you did something else in your pacing.
I think it's that beat sheet. I honestly do. I mean, this is why those movies like Jaws and Alien and The Hunger Games, I mean, obviously they were books. Well, I don't think Alien was, unless it was a novelization after the fact. But this is why, blockbuster movies work, because of that pacing. And I think that's why using a screenwriting template for a thriller makes a lot of sense, because we're exposed so much to that sort of pace, that kind of pacing. We're used to it, so we expect it. I mean, obviously we don't expect it when we're reading literary fiction, right? I mean, nobody is going to expect that kind of pacing in, Michael Ondaatje or Ishiguro.
When I came across the word thriller in association with this book, it started making sense to me. Because initially it's a family story.
Right.
There's a loving mother and
Right.
children who are different. It's very interesting. Something's going to happen. But it was the word thriller, and I don't know if that was in your publisher's in your someplace. That this was a thriller that made the book fall into place for me. Very enjoyable.
Thank you. Well, it's weird because, I don't actually, one of the questions I think for the reader's guide that I just had to put together is, I think it was actually for my next book, but it equally, the question applies to Masterclass or even Vox as well. what shelf do you put this on? Does it go in women's fiction? Does it go in thriller? Does it go in horror? Is it science fiction? I don't know. So it's
Multiple copies.
multiple. I like that idea. I like that idea.
Reading shelf.
So
Do you read your reviews?
yes. Yeah, and it's just funny actually because I do and I don't. I mean, I like to get an idea of, I like to take the pulse basically. And, I also like to know, the masterclass didn't get as much publicity as Vox, but Vox got a hell of a lot of publicity. So, live radio, live television, different countries, live radio in Spanish, live radio in Italian, and I had to really, think like that. There are issues, obviously, in my books, and you'll see this if you read the next one that's coming out, that some people find controversial. And so I like to know ahead of time what people are thinking. Now, obviously, if it's some troll who said Dalcher can't write her way out of a paper bag, I mean, that's a troll, or it's some relation of mine who but if somebody actually makes an effort to say something that's critical and that makes sense, then I will maybe take that into consideration. I mean, I just I foresee a little bit of stuff coming down the road when the third book comes out, and I sent it to my pen pal Lionel Shriver. She wrote "We Need to Talk About Kevin." I highly recommend her books, by the way, for book clubs, especially a recent one called "Should We Stay or Should We Go?" that just came out last month. It's about aging and what will you do? Do you stay at home? It's really good and it's relevant. For all of us, I think, no matter what age we are, but I think the over 50 crowd will probably get more out of it. So I'm sorry, I'm digressing again. I sent this thing to Lionel, and she responded with a few dirty words. But the essence of it was, why are you reading this shit? So yeah, I do, but I also don't. It's more before the book comes out to get that finger on the pulse, and then and afterwards, whatever. Thank you.
Did you know from the beginning you were going to kill her off at the end? I wasn't ready for that.
In Vox, I didn't.
Well, I came to a book club because I read the book. Sorry. This is a big question, actually.
Yes, when I wrote Anna Karenina, I did know that she was going to throw herself under the train. As for Masterclass, I'm not gonna expand on anything. There are lots of different ways to think about the ending of the book. So sorry, for the sake of people who haven't read it, I need to pass.
But you did know that from the beginning. It wasn't something that evolved in your mind.
I never know how my books are going to end. I don't. I mean, I have an idea, but I don't know exactly. So
After the lecture ends.
I'm also happy to do an after the lecture answer. Sorry to be so cagey.
Thank you.
Any other ones? Oh, yeah.
Well,
Maddie?
I'm the young one in here, and with Britney Spears' situation, this eugenic possibly is her problem, because she's been forced to where she can't reproduce,
I see what you mean. I don't know, I haven't been following what's going on with Britney Spears. I know that she's fighting this conservatorship because she's basically being controlled by people, even though she's, what, 40 or 30? And so let's talk about that, because I don't know whether that necessarily speaks to, the people who are controlling her being eugenicists. I certainly think it speaks to the people who are controlling her being in control of her. And that's what I like to write about. I mean, it could be eugenics, it could be, it could be something like, female and male, equality in terms of who gets to work in the public and, sphere, and not just the domestic sphere, like in Vox. It could be, women who hate men so much that they want to create a very controlled environment where no men are permitted, which is the third book, or that's coming out in October. Or it could be something like the draft that I just finished, which is about, hate speech and how much do we regulate this, and is it okay to extend hate speech laws into people's homes. Scotland seems to think it is. Anything you say in your home can and will be held against you effectively if they repeal what's known as the dwelling defense over there to their hate speech law. So in every single one of these scenarios, what have we got? We've got somebody telling somebody else what to do. That's what I like to write about. It makes people think, and I think it kind of pisses some people off, which is good. Yeah.
When did you begin writing this book?
This one?
The book we're currently discussing, Masterclass.
Yeah, right after Vox sold, so it was November 2017. Yeah, it was right then, because when I sold Vox, they wanted a 2-book deal, and I told them about the concept for this. And so I wrote that, over the from the end of 2017 to, 2018, and then it came out obviously it goes through a bunch of rounds of editing and stuff. It came out in April 2020.
So well in advance of current issues we have seen since before the pandemic, and carrying over into current discussion about curriculum in schools.
You're talking about Masterclass. Oh yeah,
Well in advance.
Yeah. Well, I wrote Vox well in advance of, months in advance of the Me Too movement. There was no Me Too movement when I was writing Vox. It just did not exist. So the Me Too book of 2018 was written in the absence of the Me Too movement. But all these movements are the same, aren't they? I mean, they're really all the same. And I don't like to be controlled. I don't like to be told what to do or how to speak or whether I should have kids or not. I mean, these are universals, and I think they're all going to come back and resurge, over and over and over again. So that's the nice thing about writing dystopia, is that it's just timeless, right? I mean, but I will say, the fourth book, the one about the hate speech and the control over speech being extended into people's own homes, that is very much a product of my reading the headlines in the Times over in the UK and the Spectator on a daily basis over the past year or so, and I'm scared. So.
I was going to set up for the group, and the group can join in on this.
Sure.
We're discussing, and I'd like to know your opinions, and I'm sure she would. There is testing
I just read something interesting about a proposed curriculum change in California to the mathematics curriculum, because there are, a lot of issues now, and one of the things they want to steer math teachers away from is expecting a correct answer. Right, or showing work, and I mean, so there's a lot of there's a sense in which I think a lot of objectivity is being challenged. The sense of objectivity is being challenged, and this is something that I'm writing about in the book that I hope will be published, because I think it's important. It's called Lexecution. And dare anybody to change that one. But really, I did quite a bit of research into this sense of trying to inculcate into our kids the idea that nothing can really be known. Right, I mean, it's this very postmodernist Derrida, and Foucault kind of philosophy that, well, we just can't really, nothing is real. So if I say today that I'm this, then I am that. If I say that math doesn't 2 + 2 doesn't necessarily equal 4, because I don't feel comfortable with it equaling 4, or because I got the answer wrong, and if it equals 4, then oh my God, that reflects somehow badly on me for not knowing that. So I think we're in trouble. I think a lot of it has to do with this idea of relativism really taking hold, and just not really. Not wanting to face any like truths. Anyway, but that was a question for the book club, not for me.
The last little comment is, they want you to explain your thinking, but there's a certain answer they want you to say, and if you don't match their little, whatever they're expecting answer, they might not accept it.
Did somebody ask me why I don't teach anymore?
Because it doesn't pay.
First and then second.
I was just going to say it's not the tests, it's what they do with the tests. But one of the things that came to me, I did teach high school back several lives ago, I think. And it's not, there are so many ways to be gifted, and Q is only one piece of it, or one type of it, and it doesn't measure all the other ways you can be gifted. And that's true of all of those standardized tests. I was working at the state level in the 80s when they created the standards of learning, and the motivation was not necessarily the purest. You had a state board of education that wanted to kind of prove public schools were bad because their kids were in private schools. And that was kind of the underpinning. Now, people who were the professionals were able to kind of shift it and sort it, so it wasn't what it was originally envisioned, but that was the original motivation behind it for those people who were on the State Board of Ed. They weren't on it past that governor. So
That's fascinating.
And in your book, it's like you were able, the State Department of Education was able to couch it in very nice terminology that sounded good, and the reality was something different.
Right. And of course, I mean, I'm not a mother. It's strange that I have mothers in all of my books, right? But if I didn't have mothers with kids, I would have people with dogs. You need some sympathetic, stakes raising kind of a character, right? And who does that best? I mean, who tugs on the heartstrings the most? Children and puppies. For me, really, puppies. The children can, but I do think that there are a lot of people out there who would be really happy with this kind of system because they don't think that their kid would ever fail, right? And And, you know, and when I was a kid, I mean, I don't know, we didn't have, well, I went to private schools, but I know a thing called tracking, right? They would, you know, they would look at people and, you know, in first grade, okay, you know, you're going to be a ditch digger and you're going to be the engineer, you know, who's watching, you know, the person digging those ditches. You know, there's I think it's fallacious to say that we're all, even though obviously we all have different talents, but there's also a tendency sometimes for people to want to say that we're all equal. Absolutely, right? We're all this, and I don't think we are. But it's tricky.
Have the equal opportunity.
Well, right, exactly. Exactly. And you were the next in line for a question. I'm sorry, ma'am.
No, that's okay.
Oh.
I was just going to say, one of the smartest people I know was my grandmother, born in 1874 in Maine, way back in the woods, in one-room school. She had the best vocabulary, the best math knowledge, the best geography, the best English. She never misspelled or meaning in a Reader's Digest. And she was just so worldly, despite her little beginning.
Right. I think there are a lot of people like that. I mean, you know, Mom's mom was, my Nana was a little next generation, probably 2 generations on actually, but still 8th grade education, you know, really humble farm girl. You know, immigrant beginnings, you know, parents didn't speak English, and they went, and she's smarter than most of the, you know, graduate students that I used to teach. I mean, not even smarter, but more prepared, wiser.
Too many divisions without a direction in some of the teaching.
Right. And also, you know, there's that thing about not expecting the right answer.
And also people, as my generation, when you went to high school, you were rather tracked, was home ec, secretarial,
Right.
or college
Right.
oriented, and nobody had any problems.
Right.
And it didn't say you couldn't move out of the class, you know.
Right. There was a sense in which I think that was the default. Right. You know, if you were a woman, you were going to be a nurse
Oh, yes.
or a stewardess.
Oh, yes.
But that didn't mean that you had to be a nurse or a stewardess. It was the
And then there were always the examples who wrote those.
right. Exactly.
I'm curious, I'm sure the rest of you are, the different characters in the book. Who did you like as a group, and who did you dislike as characters? Starting with Mom, would you do what she did?
Well, remember, I see. There are people who haven't read the book, so we don't want to give. Okay.
She didn't have a choice. Because my mind was, from my viewpoint, she made a big choice.
Yeah, well.
I only left her.
Well, here's a scenario. Suppose this world that I told you about. Imagine this near future world where perfection counts, and there's a tiered school system, right? There's just 3 colors: silver, green, and yellow. Silver's the best. Green is, you know, not bad, and yellow is those are the federal boarding schools that are far away from home. They're restricted visiting, and so on and so forth. Very much inspired by the state school system that was going on in the U.S. In the early and middle part of the last century. So suppose a mother has these 2 children, one in the top tier school, the silver school, one in the green school, and the one in the green school doesn't score so well on, you know, her weekly or whatever it is test, monthly test. I can't remember. Thank you. You've all read this book much more recently than I have. So she's sent off. What would you do? or
And when
forward.
they pooled their resources, they could do something. They were able to work together. So I liked both of the girls because they were the kids. I hated the husband.
Yeah, I mean, that's a jerk.
I hope he's in your book where they separate the women and the
No, but he is modeled after a high school boyfriend I had who dumped me. Malcolm. Well, there's Joe that's another boyfriend. Yeah. Backseat of a Buick, or is it I can't remember. I'm teasing. Sorry, Mom. She knows. She's read my books.
Also, one last comment.
Yeah.
I thought the problem about the government intervention was more one of cultural support for that. If there was within the people and how that got there, I'm not going to that. I'm just saying, if the people in the country, usins, agreed with the idea, it would fly.
Well, it did in 1920.
Yes.
You know, there were 3 international eugenics conferences held between 1911 and 1920. 2 of them were held in the United States. You know, Helen Keller, I've got some great quotes. In fact, if you don't mind, I will give you just a couple of them because I think it does show, it speaks to the point of, you know, what we were talking about with respect to how acceptable this would be. So, bear with me. We had Helen Keller, for instance. Well, Helen Keller, what did she say? She said, the world is already flooded with unhappy, unhealthy, mentally unsound people who should never have been born. If left to the uncontrolled caprices of nature, we shall have a larger percentage of children that are forced to toil in mills and factories. She also said, a human life is sacred only when it may be of some use to itself and the world.
Helen Keller said that.
Yes, I have the news clipping right here, and I have the source. There was an issue with a woman who had a baby, and a doctor, it was called the Black Stork case in the news, and the doctor suggested the baby was just so messed up that the doctor, you know, the mother decided, please, just let my baby die. And of course, everybody was up in arms about this, and so Helen Keller offered this response. Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, as was her UK counterpart, Mary Stopes. Margaret Sanger said, to apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is already tainted. W.E.B. Du Bois, writing in Birth Control Review in June 1932. This was a Margaret Sanger publication. She was at least one issue of it was devoted to the black view on eugenics, birth control, and so on. So,
Dark or black?
oh, I'm sorry, black is in black people. Okay. Yes. So, if I can say that. So W.E.B. Du Bois said, moreover, and he's talking about black leaders, black African-American leaders at that time. Moreover, they are quite led away by the fallacy of numbers. They want the black race to survive. They are cheered by a census return of increasing numbers and a high rate of increase. They must learn that among human races and groups, as among vegetables, quality and not mere quantity really counts. Yeah, I know, surprise! There are others. There are others who who have said similar things. And this was only 100 years ago, or less than 100 years ago, right? I mean, we had at the International Eugenics Conference, the first one that was held in London in 1911, there was a paper that was presented on the problem of the human germ, something or other. And there were several solutions, to how do we prevent this, defectives, let's say, from overrunning our population. And there were 8 or 9 different points, and one was, segregate them, put them in institutions, educate them, educate the parents, birth control, contraception, and sterilization, and then of course the 8th or 9th, the final one was euthanasia. This is in 1911 in England. These were Americans. And their names were not Adolf. So I found that fascinating. So I only kind of bored you with a little bit of this because I think it speaks to how, of course, it could happen, because it did. And yeah.
I like how you were pointing out in your discussion that things happen step by step by step, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, look what we did, type of thing. And
Right.
it happens throughout everything that we do.
I think so. And people are happy with it. I mean, that's how you get people to go with something. It's that frog boiling in water. You put a frog in boiling water, he's going to jump out. You put a frog in cold water and raise the heat up a degree every minute, and he's just going to boil to death without even realizing it. So that's the kind of stuff I like to write about. I think it's been really fun. But no, it's been fun finding this way to write commercial. I mean, if there's one thing about these books of mine, and look, they're not the best books in the world. I mean, I'm not going to win any prizes. I know that. But I'm okay with that. What I like about them is that there is a way to write a thriller that you can read and the pacing's good and you don't have to stop and look up words in a dictionary. And you will with Lionel Shriver, trust me, but but also that has some kind of interesting element to it beyond, okay, there's a bad guy and there's a good guy and the good guy kills the bad guy, right? So I'm
Something eye-opening.
yeah, and or at least discussion kind of catalyzing too. I mean, and I hope that the next book, Finlandia, will really pull some of that out, because as much as we all hated Malcolm in this book, I think you're gonna find Jennifer Jones very interesting as the co-founder of Finlandia, which is a world where, well, it's not a world, it's a self-sufficient, all-female community that our main character and her daughter need to go to when the pension fund crisis blows through the roof, and when the U.S. basically turns into a Venezuela. So they've got to go to this place, and I'm throwing you. Well, that's the background, though. I mean, really, the world is already like that, and they need a place to go. And the last place she wants to go is to this all-female commune that called Finlandia that her, radical feminist mother founded 25 years ago. And so they go there, and things are interesting. There are no men to be mad at, which is really going to make some of the box readers upset.
I thought the question and answers with the author really helpful and made you think, and it helped, it gave more information to the book. That a lot of times, like with the author, it's like they're not saying much of anything, but this really added to the book for me. In fact, like I underlined things. When I read the book, I'm writing, I wrote
more complex characters. I mean, this is a, it's a self-criticism as well in the first book and in the second book. I think I've been seeing people, really, kind of black and white, and like totally evil or totally great. Although I don't think Elena is. I liked Elena. I like Elena a lot because she's in a sort of a made her bed and has to lie in it kind of a situation, and so she helped create, even if she did it passively, she sort of helped create this world.
I thought your most sympathetic character was the younger daughter.
Right.
It was heartbreaking what that child was through.
I thought so. Yeah, and she was very much modeled after, the stories that I read about these boys who had been in the Fernald School for Idiotic Children in 1957 outside of Walton. It was also called the Fernald School for the Feeble-Minded. I mean, it had multiple names over the years. Well, I suppose we should have if there are no more questions, and if you do have any more questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. But I want to make sure everybody put her or his